Hello, welcome back to my channel. I am Monet and you're watching Life is Monet. I've read quite a few books since my last recent read video, and so I want to make sure that I find the time on my channel to give updates on the books that I read, because I'm not really good about doing the wrap-ups the way that I used to. Like when I used to have set monthly wrap-ups, I was much better at it, but since I got rid of that like kind of structure of having a day each month where I wrap up all of my books, it's been very sporadic on my channel. That is something that I want to fix. I want to bring back monthly wrap-ups. So I would just say look forward to that in the next year, me bringing that back to my channel. But in the meantime, let's talk about some books that I've read recently. First up, we have Bola. This was a book that brought out so many emotions when I was reading it. We are following two male characters that have this attraction and love for one another, but they are alive in a time where it's not okay for them to be their authentic selves. This book is a historical fiction that takes place right before the outbreak of the Kosovo War and the subsequent genocide that followed. One of the main characters that we follow is Albanian and the other person is a Serb, and so they are on opposite sides of a war, of a cultural shift and genocide that's going to occur in their lands, and so there's so many things that are going to work towards keeping these two characters apart, and so I will say that like the writing in this book, fucking stunning. Like I have not read a book like this with such beatific writing since like A Dowry of Blood. This is not the same type of writing, but if you've read A Dowry of Blood, you know how impactful and just like hard-hitting the like certain passages in that book was. I experienced that so much with this book. There were so many moments in this book where I just had to like stop and just take a breath and take a moment to like understand what the characters are feeling. They have correspondence and letters, or kind of like diaries that they write that may or may not make it to the other person, and these characters go on such a journey after the war. They get separated in the book, and the pain of not being able to be yourself and to be with the person that you really love ate at them, and they made some very questionable and honestly terrible decisions. Especially one of the main characters that we follow, he starts to get spiteful and hateful towards his wife and his children, and you see like the decisions that he's making, and you know that like it's coming from a place of pain, and like it's one of those like hurt people kind of things. And so you just have this overwhelming amount of compassion for everyone in the story, and these are very flawed characters, right? They're not good people, and you understand that so many things are eating away at them, that they're making like rash decisions and they're lashing out at people and they're causing pain to everyone around them because of like what they're dealing with on the inside. It's a very complicated book with beautiful writing. I can't say that you're gonna love the love story, like I said, because these are flawed characters and they cause pain and they make bad decisions, and like it's one of those books that makes you wonder, like if we had met as the right people in the right time in history in the right place, and I wasn't me and I didn't come from my community and my heritage and my tradition, and you weren't you, what could we have been? Like I highly recommend this book if it sounds good to you. It's a heartbreaking story. I'm gonna see if I can find like one of my favorite passages to read to you guys. Perhaps you were relieved that night that I left. I know that you were, isn't that right? You were glad that I left you alone, weren't you? Sure you were. Because if I hadn't been certain that you wanted me to leave, that you didn't want to embrace another morning with me, I would have never left like that. I would have stayed and suggested, how about we go to Usinj or Saranda or any other town? I would have suggested, how about you tell that woman you're not going with her? Or how about you disappear without saying anything? You just never go back to her, but leave with me instead. You didn't spend a moment looking for me. You didn't look for me at all, but you gave me up like an old wallet and disappeared just like that. You disappeared and I was left alone in this world. Here's a second passage that I really loved. Those moments that we knew each other, they were the best of my life, untainted, because we didn't have to explain anything to each other, anything at all. We were floating in space, bathing in the eternal morning like two sundials. I don't know, just the letters, like the diary entries to these people is something that's like threaded throughout the book, and it reminds you of their humanity, and it reminds you of what they sacrificed and what they lost as you watch them make just heartbreaking and disheartening decisions throughout the book. The next book that I recently read was House of Hollow. This was something that I read back in like late October, early November. I thought that this was such a well-written YA. It was gory and like uncomfortable and like unsettling in all the right ways. It was atmospheric and descriptive. And there was something that was just so luring about the plot that just made me settle into the story and to just take in everything around me. There is a heavy amount of like death in the book, and like the descriptions of like decaying things and like dying body and leaves and like the air is just smelling like, I don't know, it was just so many things that like touched the five senses of me throughout the story that I thought that this was like a pretty strong YA. I listened to the audiobook, which I thought was really good, and then I bought a physical copy. So usually when I read a book before I own it, it's a testament to how much I enjoyed the book if I decide to buy me a physical copy. This is something that I would definitely recommend for a fall creepy like Halloween read. You can read it, I guess, even in the winter, but I just feel like I read it in the perfect season, and so this was one that I really enjoyed. The next book that I read recently is All of Our Demise, which is book 2 to All of Us Villains. Book 1 was one that I really enjoyed last year. It came in as like one of my most surprising but enjoyable reads of 2021, and I was incredibly looking forward to reading the sequel. Unfortunately, the sequel was a bit of a letdown for me. I feel like there was a dissonance between book 1 and book 2. Like, had the authors, like book 1 was so heavy on like the action and the violence and like intrigue of the games and the intensity, and then book 2 was just like incredibly dragged out. None of the characters really ended where I wanted them to. We didn't have as much action as we did in the first book. So I just felt like book 1 we left off on such a high and a cliffhanger, and then book 2 everything was kind of downhill from that. And I feel like the book definitely peaked in book 1, and that's unfortunate because it's a duology. So I just wish that it was spaced out a lot more. Even beyond that, I am not satisfied with the ending of the story. So this is just a duology where I really only enjoyed book 1 and not really book 2 at all. If I was to rate book 2, it would probably be like 2 stars. So that was a bit of a disappointing read. The next book that was also a disappointing read for me was the sequel to A Fate of Wrath and Flame, and that's going to be A Curse of Blood and Stone. This was another one where it suffered like significantly from just having like a middle book syndrome. This is the second book in a trilogy. Book 1, there was just so much mystery that was going on, so many things that the characters were like trying to seek out and learn about each other. There were some jaw-dropping kind of like moments throughout the story, and I was excited for book 2, and it was just like nothing happened. Like nothing memorable at all happened in this story. I don't feel like our characters really moved plot wise. I don't think our characters really moved development wise. And one of the things that like I typically don't enjoy in books that is actually really popular is like a heavy amount of angst and like enemies to lovers. I hate drawn out enemies to lovers so that you just build up a heavy amount of angst and the characters are in their head and they're going back and forth between I love him, does he love me, and I can't stand him and forget him, but wait, he's just so amazing and she's so frustrating. It's just like that ping pong back and forth. I am not a fan of that, and that is all that this book was it's just angst between two characters that are incredibly frustrated with each other but also have feelings for one another, and they don't know how to process that. And I also feel like we had a bit of regression in character development because this isn't any different from how they had to work together in book 1, but it was just much more natural and seamless in book 1. The angst was balanced with the plot and the story, but then this book was just entirely angst, and I was just not here for it. The characters got really annoying. I feel like they were making like stupid decisions, and like it was terrible being in the main character's head. So I don't know if I'll be picking up book 3 immediately. I don't even know if I want to continue with the series because this one was just so much of a letdown. I gave book 1 5 stars, and then I gave this book 1 star. And so yeah. Next up we have The Nature of Fragile Things. This was such a joy to read. It was simple. It was kind of like no thoughts, head empty. The characters were very compelling. We start off with the main character by the name of Sophie, who has recently immigrated to New York City from Ireland, and she is not happy. She's struggling to get by. She's in a very tiny like closet sized apartment with multiple roommates, and she wants a better quality of life. And so she answers a mail order bride kind of thing where someone in San Francisco has put in like this bid in a newspaper or national newspaper that he's looking for a wife to move to the West Coast to take care of his daughter because his previous wife, which is the mother of his child, passed away from consumption, and he's just a single widow and he needs someone to take care of his child. So Sophie, really not having any better options, she answers this. She moves to San Francisco. She starts to get acclimated. They both understand that this is a marriage of convenience. She wants a better quality of life, which he is able to provide because he has enough money to do so, and he needs a mother to care for his child because he travels a lot for work, and she's able to do that. So there's really no emotional connections or like love going on between the two of them. He's very secretive, very closeted, doesn't answer a lot of questions, doesn't have friends over, doesn't talk about family. Like, he is a very, very secretive person, and she is kind of like questioning why he's so secretive, but also just understanding that this is a marriage of convenience, so I'm not gonna like bother him or like look a gift horse into the mouth. Then one day a pregnant person comes to the house looking for her husband, saying that her husband was working with Sophie's husband and now they're on a work trip that has basically gone awry and she hasn't heard from her husband in forever. So Sophie, not knowing anything about her husband, where he's gone or what he does for work, kind of invites her in to see if they can try to figure out what's happening to both of their husbands. They have one photo on the mantle, and when the pregnant woman looks at that photo, she is astonished because the man that Sophie is married to is actually her husband. And so they find out that he has been living a double life. And so from there, the story just kind of propels them on this journey of discovering why he was set out to be a polygamist, to marry multiple women. The way that all these women were brought together was really interesting because they are essentially married to the same man. They all have very different relationships with him. They have a very different understanding of him. He was completely different people when he was with them, and they should essentially not like each other, right? They should feel betrayed. They should hate each other. But somehow throughout the journey, they are all drawn closer together and they kind of form like this little family. I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. It's not action packed at all. It's very character driven. It's all about character relationships, but I still just thought that it was a pretty solid story. It wasn't too long. It wasn't too short. The details were really good. I enjoyed the historical setting, and I enjoyed watching Sophie come to love this little girl as if it was her own, and making decisions that would cause her pain for the sake of the betterment of the child. The next book I have is Thistlefoot. This is a book that follows the descendants of Baba Yaga as they have immigrated into the US, and one day they get called up saying that their great-great-grandmother left them this house and that it's going to be delivered soon. And so Valentine and Isaac are the youngest remaining descendants, and so they inherit this house. And I thought that this book was like unorthodox and fun. It's a different telling on Baba Yaga. Usually when we follow things dealing with her, it has her in it. So just seeing like a Baba Yaga retelling in modern day and like what descendants of her would look like, especially like in America, the author touched on so many like kind of hot topics throughout the story. And one of the things that I really enjoyed, and I think that if you truly understand America, you would understand how impactful hysteria is. I think that we are a country that kind of feeds off conspiracy theories and hysterias, and it's a powerful political tool. It's a powerful social tool. And one of the things in this book as they face off against this antagonist is that he manipulates kind of like hysteria and like feeds off people's fears and like blows them up into like these massive movements, and people just start kind of acting out with violence and in brutality against one another. And I enjoyed this kind of like converge between like Baba Yaga and like Russian or Slavic folklore with like America today, or like it has a bit of it, like it's modern and it feels very weird because it's so fantastical in a modern setting. If you've read The City We Became or The City We Become by N.K. Jemisin, that is a book that is like high fantasy but set in New York City. And usually I don't have a good time with books like that because a lot of times it just there's a discombobulation between like, okay, here's a book that is like incredibly fantastical, right, and entirely fantasy, but I'm supposed to imagine it existing in like modern day life. I felt that throughout this book, but it was definitely done in a way that didn't take away from my quality of the story. I still ended up giving this book 4 out of 5 stars. So yeah, the next 2 books I ended up DNFing because I just was not enjoying at all. The first one is going to be One by One by Ruth Ware. I can't remember exactly what just wasn't working for me. I know that it was the writing style and the POV of the main character. It was just way too like slow and like unmoving for the beginning part of the book, and I was just not in the mood for that. I could already tell from the beginning that this was not going to be a book that like I really saw myself enjoying. So I was just like, okay, I can spend my time reading something of a higher rating. So I'll probably be unhauling this one, because I did try to listen to the audiobook and I DNF'd that one as well, because I had the same sentiments from trying to read it physically and trying to listen to the audiobook. I just don't think that this is a book for me. Another book that I am sad to say I DNF'd was The Stardust Thief. The beginning part of this book was just so honestly kind of boring and slow moving. Nothing was really happening, and I felt like even when I was reading it, I was zoning out. And so I ended up texting one of my friends who also read it, and I'm like, can you tell me what happened? And they were like, honestly, I can't even remember what happened in the beginning of that book either, because it was kind of boring. Most of the reviews have been the same, so I felt kind of validated in the fact that like it wasn't just me that was just having such a hard time with this book. The second half of the book does pick up. It does get much more interesting. The problem that I had is that I was so disconnected for the first half of the book, and I was just kind of like forcing myself to get to the point where the book would get better, that by the time it did come, I couldn't appreciate it because I wasn't invested. I had been so disconnected from the story. There was really nothing keeping me tethered to reading it other than the fact that I wanted to see if it was going to get better in the second half of the book like everyone said. It did. I think that just keep that in mind if this is a book that you want to read. There is some great things happening here. It's just the story is not balanced at all, and the first half, like I couldn't even give you high points or like highlights of the book because it all just kind of blips past. There was nothing really memorable about the first part of the book. The next book that I have is The Witch's Heart. This was a book that I had made a 5-star prediction earlier in the year, and I ended up giving this 4 stars, I think. So it wasn't quite 5 stars, but I did enjoy it. I have to say that like I don't know much about Ragnarok or Odin or Loki the god or even Angrboda. I don't even know if she's like a real character. I would imagine that she is, because the way that the story is written, it makes me feel like this is a retelling that's pretty close to the original. It has like this kind of like Circe, Song of Achilles vibe to it. And so if I did some research and find out like this book was actually like a retelling of a real myth story or something, I would not be shocked. I felt like Angrboda as a character was just intense. She was a very intense character. Her loyalty was also very intense, and the things that she was willing to go through and deal with, I thought that it was a little odd, the balance between it, but it wasn't a problem. It was just like, here's a very complex character. I think the author did a really good job of conveying that, but there were so many moments where like Angrboda was detached from what was going on around her and like kind of wanting to be in her bubble, wanting to be separate from the world. And then there was times where like she was kind of moved to do something, and I felt like there was just this back and forth of that throughout the entire book, and it kind of affected how efficient she was in handling certain situations, because she resolved things that I found would not have been such a big deal if she had addressed them sooner. Like, I feel like the warning signs for a lot of the things that happened in this book came to fruition, and like it was themes throughout the entire story. And then we have this main character that's just like, nope, it has nothing to do with me. I want to live in the middle of nowhere in my cave, minding my own business. And then the plot had to come to a point where like it literally converged and centered around her to force her to be like, okay, all right, and now I guess now I'm going to do something. And then all of a sudden we found out that she's like this powerful person, and it's like, you had the capabilities to do all of this the entire time, but you just couldn't be bothered. I don't know, that's not a complaint. Again, she's a complex character. I still enjoyed following her. I just can't say that I completely understood her, and that's okay. The next 3 books are books that I also ended up DNFing. The first one is going to be Identity. I am sad, kind of a little, that I didn't finish this book, but honestly the only reason that I DNF'd it is because it was too long and my attention was dwindling as I continued to read the book. But I thought that it was a really good story. There's some interesting takeaways and like just discussion points that are going on in this book that I understand all of the praise that it's getting. I just wish that it had been shorter. So in this book, we're following this main character of Navidita, and she is half German, half Indian, and she lives in Germany. This book is actually written by a half Indian, half German author, so it's technically own voices. And she's she lives in Germany, so this is a translated work. So Navadita is someone that has always struggled connecting to her Indian ancestry and feeling like she's not Indian enough. And race is such an interesting concept in Germany. It is not like that of America at all, until a certain point in history. And so I feel like Germany is still, and one of the things that I took away from this novel is that Germany is still trying to reconcile what race was to them before Hitler and after the Nazi regime took so many components of racism in America and brought it to Germany and put it in place in terms of like political and like government infrastructure. And so like there's this weird like kind of dynamic between like what race actually is that's outside of just like black and white. Like this is just a mix of different ethnicities and nationalities. Our main character, she never really feels Indian enough, and she's very self-conscious around that, and she for a while didn't even like acknowledge her Indian ancestry, and she just mostly went by just being German. And so she is a college student, she's a PhD student, and her professor that's actually over her is this kind of like Ibram X Kennedy of race and like just gender studies, and she's constantly getting into these widespread debates between her and just other like highly esteemed colleagues around what it means to be male or female, what gender really is, how it just being a racial construct goes into these things, or like societal construct goes into these things, and race is really one of them. So she's very popular on Twitter, social media. She's very polarized. She gets into academic debates, and she is one person that Navadita has found that helps her connect with her Indian heritage, and she starts to become more of a version of what she wants herself to be, waging in between being Indian and being German. But then it comes out that her professor is actually not Indian at all. She is white, like entirely white. It's a whole Rachel Dolezal situation, and she changed her skin color, she changed her hair, she changed everything about her to just be Indian. And so the world is in an uproar. She, like I said, she's a very known person. Social media is like all in their wits about it. One of the things that I thought was really interesting about the story is that the author puts tweets and like just social commentary into the story. So it's a bit of a mixed media, and just reading all of the different reactions to these things, and it's like what it means to be transgender, and like if being transracial is really a thing, if it's all a social construct, and like all these different things that we kind of just create and we abide by, then technically transracial should be a thing. And so our main character has to battle like, this is someone that I used, or that I let validate my culture and my heritage. And so if they weren't valid, were they even able to give me validation in these areas? If they were like a traitor in the first place, like a race traitor, I don't know. There was so many like just interesting concepts in the book, and I think that making these like highly educated individuals and putting this in academia, but also bringing in social media was like perfect. It was a perfect dynamic of a story. So many of the points that were being made in the book was solid points. Like her professor's name is Saraswati, which is actually, I believe, an Indian goddess or god. I'm not exactly sure. But even the name in which she calls herself was cultural appropriation. Like everything about her and her career was cultural appropriation. I mean, you go into the book knowing that she is not who she says she is, but if you didn't know that, you would think like, damn, this is a highly educated person that's making points. Like, I agree, like she's right. Like, this is what we need. And then finding out that someone that you would have like just really connected to on so many levels, even me as a black person, I'm like, damn, she's making a lot of points, but she's white, right? Are these even her points to make? There's even one point in the book where she argues different points in history, taking the Haitian Revolution for example, where the newly freed Haitians declared Germans as honorary Africans, right? They let them into the community and made them honorary like descendants of Africa, right? So they were able to claim that ancestry. The indigenous tribes accepting individuals from the community and then letting them lay claim to that title and just welcome them in. It's like, damn, you're right. There is points in history where a race was honorarily appointed to someone else. However, that was the decision of the community, right? It wasn't something that you could do yourself. I don't know. It's just a book that really makes you think about race. One thing that I thought was interesting in the book is that Saraswati defends herself. She is not sorry at all, and she continues to debate and go to bat for people that are trying to out her as white, and she is unapologetic at all. And so it's like, dang, like this makes it even that much more complicated, because you have someone who is a very strong, argumentative, and educated person debating this, and Navadita feels uncomfortable about it so much throughout the book, but she doesn't have the words to go up against her professor, right? This is her trainer. This is someone who has way more expertise arguing these points and like understanding these points more than she does. So I related and I understood, like, seeing a point and it's like this person is loud and rambunctious and they're making a lot of points, and like it's like you can't really get a word in, but even if you were, you don't know what you would say because you can't argue it back. You just know that is wrong, and you know that you don't feel comfortable with it. So this is a book that I plan to go back and kind of like finish later. I just felt like all of that happened within like the first 50% of the book. So we just get kind of like in this midpoint throughout the book where I started to be like, okay, when are we gonna get to the resolution? When are we gonna get the answers to like what we're all questioning throughout the story? Because this is a German author, the writing is also very different, so I would just keep that in mind. It is not American centric, but it was really nice to see how they even talked about race in America and race in different countries and race in India. There might be a little bit of self-insertion into the story because our main character has the same racial makeup as the author. I think that to explore what it means to be biracial and to come from two cultures that don't understand each other today, that haven't reconciled their own violent and brutal past with one another today, to be at that threshold, I feel like she did a really good job of describing that balance. The next book that I DNF'd was Small Angels. There was something about the story that just wasn't working for me when I started reading it. I wasn't connected. I didn't care about what was going on. Nothing hooked me. I gave it about, like, I want to say 100 pages and just nothing hooked me. And so I was just like, yeah, I'm gonna put this down and go read something else. I'm getting much better about just, you know, I don't need a reason to not read this. My reason is that I don't want to. So there's that. And then the last book that I DNF'd was Spells for Forgetting. Like, it had a very interesting plot, but the romance took it over. And I feel like there's a murder mystery in the book, and it happened years ago, and one of the male figure to this romance relationship has come back to bury his mother, and he was accused of murdering this girl years ago, who is the best friend of our female love interest. And I just felt like they were very like two-dimensional characters because their only personality was missing each other. Like, so many years have gone by, it's been damn near a decade, and like you have nothing going on for you because you're literally still stuck in the past and not even really trying to figure out what really happened that night, figuring out who really murdered this girl's best friend. It was just, I can't believe he left me, and like she's hollow inside. Like, it was very much giving Bella from Twilight in that one movie where Edward was gone and she just sat there for months on end and the seasons were changing. That's what I really felt about this main character. I can't tell you anything memorable about her, not even that she was stricken with grief over the loss of her friend or really interested in resolving the murder of her friend. It was just like her whole entire personality was missing this boy, which was unfortunate because she was actually in a relationship with somebody who wanted to marry her. And I feel like we rarely got to explore that dynamic of her just kind of like being complacent in this relationship. He was really just a placeholder for this long lost love that she had. I didn't like it. And I was very sad because I really enjoyed the YA stories by Adrienne Young, and I was looking forward to her breaking into her adult bag. It did not work out like that, and so I DNF'd it. It's unfortunate because I have the Fairy Loot edition and it's very, very pretty, but I will probably end up selling it just because I don't plan to ever go back to that book. Oh, sorry guys, there's actually one more book that I wanted to mention that I also DNF'd. I DNF'd a lot of books recently, and that is Once Upon a River. This is a very odd and abstract story, which is usually my jam, but this one just didn't work for me. The story is really whimsical. It's very abstract, very ambiguous, and it hopped around a lot. I think the writing was really good, and like I said, I love stories that usually do that, like have that writing component, but this one just hopped around way too much before I had a chance to really grasp what was going on or get attached to anything in the story. And when it hopped around, it started following completely different people in completely different cities and town, and I'm just like, what connection does this have to do with this little girl? And I'm sure that of course it will converge at the end of the story. It was just too much happened way too soon, and I feel like the author didn't give the readers enough time to become invested before she started testing the limits of our patience. Well, I guess my patience, so I DNF'd it. So that is the end of my recent reads. Thank you guys for watching my video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.